So, back in June of 2023, the whole world was watching as this tiny submersible, it was on its way to the most famous shipwreck of all time. And then it just vanished. The story of the Titan absolutely gripped everyone, but the real story, the one we're going to get into, happened in the crushing, dark depths of the Atlantic. So what really went down? And that brings us to the big, haunting question, right? How does a dream trip, the adventure of a lifetime for 5 people, how does that turn into this massive global tragedy? Well, to really get a handle on it, we've got to look at everything: the timeline of events, the actual science involved, and maybe most importantly, the critical warnings that, it turns out, were missed. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the voyage itself, then get into the moment it all went silent. After that, we'll cover the frantic race against time search, the tragic discovery, and then we'll look at the red flags, the warnings that were there all along. All right, first things first. To really wrap our heads around this tragedy, you have to understand the mission. This wasn't just any dive. This was a trip to the most famous, most forbidden shipwreck on the entire planet. Ever since they found the Titanic back in '85, people have been completely obsessed with it. But then James Cameron's movie came out in '97, and that obsession just exploded. It completely changed the game. The wreck site went from being this place for pure scientific research to, well, a bucket list destination for a whole new breed of extreme tourist. And getting there? Oh man, it means going deep. We're talking 4,000 meters down. That's into the North Atlantic, an environment that people say is actually more hostile and even less explored than outer space. Think about that. So, to really put that number into perspective, picture this. Take the tallest building on Earth, the Burj Khalifa. Now imagine stacking 5 of them, one on top of the other, and then sinking the whole thing. That's how deep the Titanic is. It's a total abyss, complete darkness, where sunlight has absolutely no chance of reaching. And at that depth, the pressure is just mind-blowing. It's something like 400 times what we feel up here at sea level. The best way to even try and visualize that kind of force? Picture a full-grown elephant balancing all of its weight on an area the size of a postage stamp. Now imagine that exact force pushing in on every single square inch of that submersible. So, who was on this incredibly high-stakes mission? There were 5 people. You had Hamish Harding, a well-known British adventurer. Stockton Rush was there. He was the CEO of OceanGate, the company that actually built the Titan. Then there was Paul-Henri Nargeolet, a legendary French expert on the Titanic wreck. And finally, Shahzada Dawood, a Pakistani business tycoon, was on board with his son, Suleiman. Okay, so let's get to the day of the dive itself. Let's look at how this journey into history took such a dark, tragic turn. So it's Sunday, June 18. The dive gets underway right at noon. Now, a trip to the bottom usually takes around 2 hours. But at 1 hour and 45 minutes into the descent, they were so close, just about to reach the wreck, all communication with the mothership, the Polar Prince, just stopped. Silence. Now, up on the surface, there wasn't immediate panic. You gotta understand, wireless signals have a really tough time getting through that much water, so losing communication for a bit, it can happen. The real alarm bells, those started going off later that night. The submersible was scheduled to be back at 7 p.m. That time came and went, and there was still nothing but silence from the Titan. And just like that, with the sub officially missing, one of the most intense, most complex search and rescue operations in recent history kicked off. The whole world was glued to their screens, watching, and all anyone could think about was that ticking clock. 96 hours. That was the number on everyone's mind. That was the estimate for how much breathable air they had left on board. So this wasn't just a search anymore. It was a countdown. You had this huge international effort scrambling to the scene. Teams from the US, Canada, France, all racing to help. Ships and planes were scanning this massive area of the ocean surface, while sonar buoys were dropped in, listening, just listening for any sign of life from below. And then, for a brief moment, on Wednesday, June 21st, there was this flicker of hope. Underwater sensors picked up these rhythmic, banging sounds, and everyone wondered, could this be it? Could the crew be alive, signaling for help? But that hope, it was tragically short-lived. Very quickly, the entire search began to pivot. It went from being a rescue mission to a recovery operation. On Thursday, June 22nd, right around the time the oxygen supply was thought to have run out, a deep-sea robot scanning the ocean floor made a heartbreaking discovery. It found a debris field. It was the wreckage of the Titan, and it was just 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic, the very ship it had set out to sea. And the terrible, profound irony of that, it wasn't lost on anyone. The sub that went down to see the wreckage had now become part of the wreckage itself, making headlines all over the world. That debris field confirmed everyone's worst fear. The Titan hadn't just gotten lost, it had been utterly destroyed. The cause? A catastrophic implosion. That's a violent, instantaneous collapse of the entire vessel, crushed inward on itself by that immense pressure we talked about. See, unlike metal, which might bend or buckle and give you some kind of warning, this carbon fiber material was known to fail all at once, catastrophically. So, finding the wreckage completely shifted the conversation. It was no longer what happened, it was now why did it happen? And as investigators started digging in, a really disturbing pattern of warnings started to emerge. And at the heart of this whole thing was a huge conflict. On one side, you had OceanGate's CEO, Stockton Rush. He actually admitted back in 2021 that he'd broken some rules to build the Titan. He chose to use carbon fiber for the hull instead of the traditional steel or titanium, all in the name of innovation. But on the other side, you had a whole chorus of deep-sea experts who were screaming from the rooftops, warning that using this material for a deep-diving sub was untested and a potentially catastrophic risk. And look, these weren't just some abstract theoretical concerns. A guy named Carl Stanley, who actually took a trip on the Titan back in 2019, said he heard loud cracking sounds during his dive. He later told reporters he was completely convinced that sound was a warning, that the hull was already starting to fail under the pressure, even back then. And maybe the most chilling warning of all, it came from inside OceanGate. In 2018, one of the company's own executives wrote this report that raised serious alarms about the carbon fiber hull. He basically warned that any failure would be impossible to detect in time, saying the issue would only be found milliseconds before an implosion. His prediction, as we now know, was tragically perfectly accurate. In the end, experts estimate the entire implosion happened in just 0.3 seconds. For the 5 people inside, it was over before their brains could even process that something was wrong. So the story of the Titan leaves all of us with this really critical, really unsettling question. Look, the drive to explore, to innovate, that's what pushes humanity forward. But this tragedy is such a stark reminder of the incredibly thin line between pushing boundaries and just plain ignoring them. So the question we have to ask is, when does that noble pursuit of innovation cross the line into deadly recklessness?